Or maybe you have 9 lives, but it doesn't matter now, Mr. Kennedy. I've sent my right hand to dispose of you.
Your right hand comes off?
Say whatever you please. Die, you worm!
The Tale of Resident Evil 4. Such a beautiful one. Resident Evil 4 is probably the most universally loved horror third-person shooter, despite all of the whiny comments that it ruined or derailed the series from the legacy fans. Developed by Capcom's production studio 4, the people behind Resident Evil Code Veronica, Killer 7, Dino Crisis, and the first Devil May Cry, the expectations were pretty high. With Resident Evil 0 releasing, Shinji Mikami, the series director, felt the need to reinvent the series. The game took off beyond expectations, became an instant modern classic, and has sold over 7 million units to date. But even if you think Resident Evil 4 derailed the franchise, we've finally arrived full circle with Resident Evil 2 Remake, a game that sold over 1 million copies on PC alone as of June 2019. It's pretty impressive. However, with Resident Evil 4, among other Resident Evil games, being ported to Switch, it made me think about this game and its ports. I played through it when it first came out, and I remember the little text in the top left. It read, "Only for GameCube." This would be a hilarious reminder of how successful the game was, since they made an agreement with Nintendo, but due to the GameCube's sales, they just could not keep it on the GameCube. They would have lost potentially tens of thousands of dollars, since the PS2 sold so overwhelmingly better than the GameCube. The PS2 sold around 150 million units, compared to the GameCube's 22. Anyway, now that brief history lesson's over, jump to present day. Resident Evil has over 10 ports. Jesus Christ. It makes sense, I guess, but you don't usually see a game from 2005 that recently with that many ports. It's hard to fathom. So today we're going to go over every port of Resident Evil 4. We're not going to go over to the same port on the same console generation, if that makes any sense. So the 360 and PS3, Xbox One, and PS4 ports will each share a spot, if that makes any sense. To start with, we'll talk about the original, the game developed for GameCube. Since it's obviously not a port, it is a good middleman and a good place to start off with.
6 years have passed since that horrendous incident.
As far as games from 2005 go, this was stellar. Running at 30 FPS, 480p, and 4x3, this is a great taste of what was to come for third-person shooters. It was also the first game I remember having in-engine cutscenes that looked exactly like the game. Most of you know the rest. Great game, full of exciting, fun moments, tons of replay value, no huge bugs or game-breaking glitches, no FPS drops or anything of the sort. It was developed for the GameCube, so this was to be expected. However, it was just a really high-quality game. However, when the game was ported, it actually ended up being the least content-filled version of Resident Evil 4. It included the classic Mercenaries minigame, the side game Assignment Ada, as well as an unlockable outfit change for Leon and Ashley. Outside of that, there are the normal barrage of unlockable weapons, aside from a few that aren't included in this version. It's not a bad place to start as far as Resident Evil 4 goes, but if this is the only version you've played, you should definitely check out a different one, since there's a lot more stuff to do in the modern versions. So, now that we're caught up on the GameCube version, we'll move to the PC version. This is actually not the first PC port though, this is the Ultimate Edition, the second time the game was ported. The first time it was ported was, well, we'll go over that later. However, the Ultimate HD Edition is the newest PC port with actual differences, the most noticeable of which is the textures. They are scalable up to 4K native resolution. The game runs in 60 FPS, has every feature from every game combined, and has a great modding community, one of which has completely remastered all of the textures, since the textures never actually have been upgraded beyond the GameCube. Take a look at this door, for example. If you own the game on Steam, this is a really good mod to check out. Anyways, this is the definitive version of Resident Evil 4, no doubt. If you're going to play the game, this is the best version to play of it. While it could be argued that the Wii version is superior, the 8th generation's consoles ports of the game boast a stable 60 frames per second with upscaled 1080p resolutions and all of the content Resident Evil 4 has to offer across both platforms. There's not much to be said about these ports. They're great ways to experience the game, and I'd put them just behind the Ultimate HD edition. You may notice that the Switch version is on here as well. If I had to be really nitpicky, I'd sort of give it a 2.5 place behind the former two, since it costs more, doesn't feature gyro controls, and really had no excuse to have no new content 14 years after release. Something I neglected to mention was that the Japanese version of the PS4 Resident Evil 4 doesn't feature decapitations. It's strange that this was made by a Japanese team, released in Japan, yet Japan is the only area that doesn't feature decapitation in their version of the game. You'll notice that in Resident Evil 5, the chainsaw death doesn't show Chris's head being removed like Resident Evil 4 does. I guess they decided to just go full on with it. After some further researching, I discovered that all Japanese versions of Resident Evil 4 don't feature any kind of decapitations.
How are you? Wow. That's amazing.
This may be a pretty big confusing jump for some, but for any who remember, Resident Evil 4 Wii changed everyone's mind about shooters as far as gyro controls went. This is the last version of the game that had new features, and it's definitely one of the best. As someone who's played this version extensively, I can tell you it's one of the most satisfying to play. Unfortunately, it's still stuck at 30 frames per second, so hasn't aged well, but the feeling the motion controls give were unparalleled. Some didn't like the motion controls, and for those who decide to stick to a controller, I can understand why you'd find this version less than stellar. However, until we get Resident Evil 4 VR, we won't find anything like this port again. It's also notable this is the first version to include all the PS2 version's extra content without the issues that the PS2 version had.
Amateurs.
The port to the Xbox 360 and PS3 in 2011 was probably the first port that put a bad taste in everyone's mouth. Resident Evil 4 HD features really no improvements from the Wii version. The gyro controls were gone. They took the PS2 version and simply kind of upscaled it to 720p, and this is one of the ports that made people start to question the difference between a remake and a remaster. It was notably the first version of the game featured achievements, which would be a trend to carry on to the present. To add insult to injury, this version was $20 while the Wii version was cheaper used at the time. Other than that, this is just a meh version of the original and saw no physical release. It's worth noting though that this game, brand new on the Xbox Live Store, was cheaper than the game is on Switch right now. That was 7 years ago.
Who would have thought that my first job would have been a rescue mission?
Marking the beginning of the port madness, Resident Evil 4 on PS2 blew everyone's mind when it came out. Not only was this game not supposed to be ported, not only did Shinji Mikami say, if this game is ported, I'm going to cut my own head off, but also it featured new content that made it the most definitive version of the game, until Resident Evil 4 Wii. Gaming sites said it just wouldn't be possible to be ported at the time, because the GameCube, quote-unquote, outperformed the PS2 graphically, and that the tech on the PS2 was just too old. In hindsight, it's pretty hilarious stuff to read. The game ended up being practically perfect, with tons of new features outweighing the few technical issues and FPS drops the game had. Let me put it this way. I had a GameCube, and my friend had a PS2. We went to his house to play Resident Evil 4. The technical issues could be good or bad, notable differences being that the fog wasn't as thick, weapons had a little bit more detail, but the water effects were subpar, and one of the strangest differences, Ashley's chest doesn't have the physics that it has in every other main version. I guess the PS2 wasn't advanced enough for that. A butchering on the PC platform, this version is based off of the PS2 version, but ported by Ubisoft. This is, without a doubt, the worst mainstream version of the game you can find. Even on high-end systems at the time, the game had lighting issues, ugly water effects, and it controlled like a nightmare. With the Ultimate Edition released, the only reason anyone would launch this disaster is for legacy mods, which there aren't that many. There's not much to touch on with this one, and many people don't even know this port exists. Originally developed for the Japanese N-Gage phone in 2005, a port was developed for iOS and released in 2009. Though it's definitely one of the worst versions of the game, it's hard to really call it Resident Evil 4 because it's pretty much a different game. It features missions akin to the length of Devil May Cry missions rather than actual full-fledged Resident Evil 4 missions. Each time you complete a story mode mission, you unlock a mercenaries mode mission, which isn't really mercenaries, it's basically time attack levels with set weapons and ammo. It's not a terrible idea, but it's just executed really poorly. I don't really think you could call it a new feature, but they added a coin shoot mode, where you shoot the blue medallions from the base game, but really just slapped into an edited version of the village from the beginning of the game. To conclude on the mobile edition, it could be much better now, but the question is, who really cares? The gaming community in whole has pretty much accepted that games like this aren't really meant for phones. Oh boy, Resident Evil 4, Zeebo Edition, alright. The Zeebo is a Brazilian 3G enabled console with wireless capabilities. It had 160 megabytes of RAM and only weighed about 3 pounds, having an AC adapter that looked smaller than a phone charger. So you might ask, how might Resident Evil 4 look on Zeebo? Well, I mean, what do you say? What do I say to this? I cannot fathom paying currency for this game. The music has just been slaughtered. The enemies look like they're permanently asphyxiating, and the frame rate struggles to stay at its base 20 frames per second. The cutscenes are slideshows, and the game literally spawns you into the village at the beginning with almost no context. It's based off the phone version, but they somehow made it worse. My favorite part of the game is the fact that when you climb up ladders, it's just a picture of Leon climbing up a ladder. What a beaut. What a true gem. So, that's all. For now, anyway. I'm sure in 5 years this video will be heavily outdated. We'll have Resident Evil 4 PS5 edition, Resident Evil 4 Xbox 2 edition, we'll have Resident Evil 4 VR, maybe even a remaster. Hell, the game's nearly 15 years old, and Resident Evil 2, the reimagining, is one of Capcom's best-selling games ever. It's almost close to perfect for survival horror. It's a lot more than you could ask for Capcom. Regardless of the quality of these ports, I want to believe that all of them came from a good place, and that the end goal was to let gamers experience this great game, no matter what the frame rate or bonus content. Except Zebo. God help you if you have the Zebo. I'd like to close with a few words that are more about my channel and me. So if you're not really a subscriber to this channel or someone who's newer, you might not need to watch this part, but I just wanted to mention that I appreciate all the support while I've been off of YouTube. Some of my videos have kind of blown up without me even being aware. As some of you know, 2018 and this half of 2019 for me have just been consumed by the military, as I've been getting prepared, going through basic training, learning my job, and it goes without saying that these things always will come first in my life, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't want to do videos anymore. YouTube was giving me a hard time on a lot of my videos, and that's what kind of made me stop originally. But as far as future videos go, we'll see what's in the cards. So thank you for watching.
I knew you'd be fine if you landed on your butt.